Okay, in this video we're going to cover how to set up workstation-based rules, or agent rules as we call them. An agent rule is basically something that you set up, that you create, and you can create as many of them as you want, which you can set up a page limit on the rule itself, and all of this I'm going to run through right now. But you can set up page limits, and the agents that sit on the workstations, once they pick up those rules, if a user breaks that rule, they'll receive a pop-up on their workstations asking them, hey, try not to print this many pages to this printer. You should really be printing to MFP or whatever other printer you've selected, which is going to be more cost effective. So that's essentially what a agent rule is. So we're going to log in with our usual admin. Once we're at the UI here, we're going to hit local agent, and here under agent rules, so what we really want to concentrate on is agent rules and agent rule groups. Everything else I think we're going to ignore, because most of this is covered in a different video, setting up a local agent and for a workstation. And these ones down here, so agent control groups, registration rules, assignments, these three are basically used just for us for troubleshooting and support purposes. So the only two options that you really want to look at is agent rules and agent rules groups. So the first thing we're going to do is create an agent rule group. Here you can see I've already got one set up, but what we're going to do is create one, and we'll give it a name. So you can create as many groups as you want, and there can be different types of groups. So they're either a printer group or they're a user group. And what happens is then when you create your rule, you then assign that rule to a particular group. So if you create, for instance, now I'm going to create a user group. When I then assign that rule to that group, all users within that group will get that particular rule. Anybody outside of that group, they will not get that rule. So here I'm just going to call it user group. And here we'll just say it's a test user group. Okay, what type of grouping subtype? Well, it's going to be a rule users. If it was printers, it will be a rule printers group, but for us it's a rule users. And I'm quickly going to save that first. So I've created the group and quickly save it. Here you can see, so let me go through the printer test group first. The printer test group is exactly the same. It's just that the rules group subtype is rule printers, and for me it's going to be the one I've just created is users. Then what we're going to do is we're going to add members to that particular group. And here you can see all the users that the agents have reported back on different workstations. What I'm going to do is just say, okay, I'm going to have user 2 and user 3, user 4, user 5 as well. What we can also do is, if we've already created groups, we can actually add the groups to a group as well. So if there were other groups in here, other user groups that I've already created and added members to, I can just select that group and say, hey, I want this group to be included for this particular rule as well. We just click on save, and members are updated. If you have a look at my printer test group, here I can say, okay, I want printers, so I can just basically select individual printers, or again, if I've already configured a group with printers or multiple groups with printers, I can add those groups as well. So I can say, okay, let's just add that device, and then also maybe add 103 that device as well, and maybe add a couple of my devices which are sitting on my machine, which is, let me just say that one, that's a Rico device, I know that. So anything I add in here and save, so when I apply a rule to either this printer group or the user group, anybody, so for the printer group, if I'm printing to these, anybody that's printing to these 3 printers, they're going to get a pop-up if they go outside of those rules, so if they break those rules. So a printer group or a printer rule is basically anybody that's using that printer. So because it's applied to specific printers. If I then go under a user group, it's only going to affect these users no matter which printer I'm printing to. Okay, I hope that makes sense. Okay. The next thing we're going to do is, once we've created our groups, is we're going to go in and go into agent rules, and I'm going to create a new rule here, and first thing I'm going to do is enable it and then give it a rule name. So I'll just call it a user rule, test rule for users. Oops. Okay, that's better. Okay, what type of rule is it? Is it a policy or is it an enforcement? Okay, that's very important distinction here. So a policy is what we would always class an agent-based rule or workstation-based rule will always be a policy, because essentially what happens is when the user receives the pop-up, they will have a print button and they will have a cancel button. Now, a print button basically saying, hey, I'm ignoring the advice to print to a different printer, and I'm just going to print to the continue to print to the printer that I had originally selected. So the job just resumes to that printer. Or I could cancel the job, in which case the job gets deleted from the spooler and I resubmit the job to a more cost-effective alternative. That's a policy, so the user has a choice. An enforcement, which is what we call an MFP rule, you have no choices. So it's basically saying, hey, this is what it is, this is the rule, this is the enforcement, and the user has no choice to make any changes. And it's actually done at the MFP level, and I'll show you an enforcement type rule in a minute. But it's essentially, it's basically saying, hey, I've sent the job, and whatever that enforcement contained, I've done it. I've enforced that job to make the changes, and you, Mr. User, you have no choice. I'm just informing you that this is what was done with that particular print job. So here we're going to, so here, if we, like I said, if we're always doing a policy, it's always a workstation-based rule. And here the rule target is it a printer or is it an agent? So again, if you're selecting a policy, another important point to remember, it's always an agent. If you're selecting enforcement, it's always a printer. All right. Click on the save, and here you can see my user rule that I've just created. Okay, the next important thing is assignments. So assigned to members of a user group or assigned to members of a printer group. So who do you, or what do you want this rule to affect? Do you want it to affect printers? So if you want it to affect printers, basically anybody that prints to those printers, or do you want it to affect users and it will be only affected to those users? So if you've got like a department of users, you know, you can make a group, move all of your users into that, from that department into that group, and create a rule to say, hey, you know, you can't print more than 1 3 pages on any desktop type printers. More than 1 or 3 pages, you know, you give the user the choice in the pop-up to say, okay, cancel and resubmit it to one of the MFPs that's close by to them. So that'd be a user group. So all the users in that department, for instance. If it's a printer group, it will be, again, you could do it the other way around. So you could say all of those printers in that department, And if you're doing that, it will affect all users printing to those printers, whether they're in that department or not. It's always going to affect anybody printing to those particular printers. Okay, so assign 2 members of a user group. Well, there is my user group that I created earlier, and if I wanted to, there's also the printer test group that I showed you earlier as well. Again, you can select them both. So you can say, you know, a user also printing to this printer, just to, you know, double up on it if you really wanted to. Next thing, pop-ups. So pop-up heading. So this is essentially what you're doing here is you are showing whatever you type in here is basically what the user is going to see. Okay, so again, we can see, say, a test rule. Keep that finger in my uppercase, test rule, and then we can say this is a test rule for users. And you can even have it with, you can even have a full stop and then carry on. Please do not print to this printer. And again, you can have line breaks in here, so it's like HTML line break tags, you know, with a open bracket /BR, and then at the end of the line, you know, close /BR close bracket. And then because of line break, so it'll just be a new line, and you can have as much text on here as you want within reason, because it's all going to fit on the pop-up. And then what you do is you select the pop-up background. Here we've got a couple of examples already within the software itself. It's essentially just a PNG file. So you can create your own PNG files. You can have your customer logo, you know, a different background, all sorts of stuff, you know, anything that you want to make it look and feel like your corporate image. And you can actually just drop it. So create a PNG, drop it in a specific folder, and it will be available here. And then you can just select it, and that will be the pop-up that the users see. So basically, the pop-up is a PNG pop-up, and then any text you put in here basically gets placed over the top of that pop-up. So it's a fairly, again, this is all done on the fly, so you can, again, you know, you can do this, you can test this. Okay, have I got it right? Does the text look right? Because you can just create a pop-up for yourself by creating a group and just putting yourself in that group and then breaking that rule, and you will get the pop-up, and only you will get the pop-up. So it's a good thing for testing. Show allowed printers in the pop-up. If you put a checkbox in there, that's essentially what that's doing is essentially saying, okay, any other printers on that user's device, on that user's workstation that fall outside of the rule range, they're going to be displayed in a pop-up, in a list, basically. So it's just saying to you, hey, these are the printers that you can print to. So these are the printers that are allowed because they fall outside of this particular rule. So you can, you know, cancel and resubmit the job to one of these more cost-effective printers. That's always a good thing to have. It's very informative for the user. And then you've got your parameters. Now your parameters just basically mean, okay, how many pages? It's a simple page rule. Okay, so how many pages in color and black and white. So if I wanted to say, hey, for instance, I'm going to do 1 page. As you can see, I've done this a few times, and then maybe 3 pages, and then 1 page again, and then again 3 pages. So minimum, maximum, 1 to 3 pages in color or black and white. If I was to now, once I've enforced that rule, so once I've actually clicked on the save button, and that rule is now enabled. All right, so if I click on there, that rule is now enabled for all users in that user group. So if we go back to the agent rules groups and go into that user group, so user 2, 3, 4, and 5, that rule is now enabled for users 2, 3, 4, and 5. Okay, and it's also telling me that those users can only print to certain printers 1 to 3 pages. as well. So if I was user 2, for instance, and I was to print a 4-page document, you know, I would get the pop-up because I'm breaking that rule. So anytime I print between 1 and 3 pages, I'm okay. The moment I print 4 pages, I'm going to get a pop-up, and it's going to say, you know, hey, you whatever text, I'm going to see the pop-up, and it's going to be here, and the text is going to be whatever you want to say in here. So this is a test rule for users. Please do not print to this printer. So then I can just cancel it and resubmit the job to an MFP. And you can actually have that in writing. You can actually put in here, you know, please do not print to this printer. Please cancel the job and resubmit to an MFP. So as that user, that's exactly what I'm going to say. As you can see, they're fairly straightforward. They're fairly easy to create. You can create as many of them as you want. You create them for you know, departments. You can create them again under users. You can create them under printers. They're fairly flexible. Each user could ideally see a different pop-up. So you can actually have different pop-ups for different departments, depending on your printing, you know, strategy. So one, you know, I could be a user sitting here, and I'd see a different pop-up. There could be a user sitting right next to me who would have different types of rules completely, and they would see a different pop-up. So that's workstation or agent-based rules. The other type of rules, which is basically the enforcement rule, is here, and these are, like I said, these are more MFP-based rules. These are a bit more complex to set up, purely because you're going to need to know JavaScript. So you'd write a JavaScript rule, and here, as far as the email is concerned, for instance, you can have an email rule, so you can force all emails to mono and duplex, and it's an enforcement. And then you can divert all jobs more than 100 pages to the print room. Again, an enforcement. So this is the difference that I was talking about earlier with a policy and enforcement. So the policy, the user has the choice. They can still print to that particular printer. With enforcement, the user has no choice whatsoever. The job is basically, so if you was going to enable this particular enforcement rule, if I'm printing 200 pages, I've got no choice. The moment I send that to the MFP, it's actually going to divert it back down to the print room. If I print an email out, even though there's a little blue line in there somewhere, it's going to send it as a colored job. It's going to get there, and it's going to force that email to a black and white and a duplex job. So that's essentially, the rest of this is exactly the same. You type, you know, what type of rule is it? Well, it's an enforcement, it's not a policy. And because it's an enforcement, it's a printer rule and not an agent rule. You just tell it where the Java file or the JavaScript file is. You just create a new one. You can just drop it in. Let me show you quickly. Drop it into the folder. PCS. Here, rules, email. Let's edit that. There it is. It's basically just a real simple JavaScript. You can just take a copy of that, and then you can just edit that and make your own rules up. The print room one, again, it's a fairly simple one. You just take a copy of the print room JS file, and then, you know, create your own rules. Okay. So that's the main difference. The rest of it is all the same, assignments and everything else. But that's the most important points to remember really is the difference between a policy and enforcement. Okay, and that's how you set up rules. Fairly straightforward, fairly easy. You can set them up very, very quickly. And the moment you enable those rules, and that includes the agent rules as well, the moment you enable them, the next time the user hits print, if they're agent-based rules, the agent picks up that rules file, and then the next time after that, the user hits print, those rules then get enforced. So they get, from the time you enable the print rule, normally it's done. Normally they get one more free print, and then after that the rules are enabled and enforced. Okay, thanks very much.